So how did you get into acting?
I'd always been an actor my whole life when I was a kid. So it was just something I always did. I was always in the school plays, and that was something I had an affinity for. So it was clearly something that I would, at the very least would be a hobby. And then I went to uni, and that's where it became more serious, and I chose to do it for a living. And just one thing led to another. Really, acting is not something that you should really do if you have a choice to do anything else. It should really only be something that you do because that's what you have to do. Do you know what I mean? So I think all actors kind of find themselves having become actors. It's just something that naturally progresses from what they have an affinity for. Because it's too hard otherwise. It's way too hard to do it if you've got an ability to do anything else.
Yeah, I guess it's quite competitive and can be expensive.
Yeah, it's competitive with other, the competition. Sure, it's competitive. There's many ways of looking at that. It's not, in my opinion, it's not competitive in the traditional sense, but it's hard on somebody's stamina. Yeah, it's a very, very tough industry to stay in because of all the rejection, because of all the difficulty. It's hard, and it's very easy to not do it anymore, to stop and do something else. So you need that sort of internal desire to do the gig, to do the job, despite everything, in order to keep going. Yeah,
that makes sense. Do you have a specific way of getting into character when you approach a role?
That's a good question. It depends on the part. The answer is I have many I've trained in so many different techniques, and they all have things that work for me, and they all have things that work for me. There's not too many techniques that accomplish everything I need all at once. Yeah. So I tend to research my roles very, very well for a very long time in a lot of detail. I tend to do a lot of work before filming, work that for the most part no one in the audience is ever going to see. So, and all my co-workers or the director or anything, it will never make it into the project, but I need to research it. I use the expression of filling my brain up, and I tend, while I'm doing that, my approach to how I'm going to play it tends to appear. And having trained in all these different techniques, what happens is you hit a roadblock, and you realize, I'm a bit stuck here. And you know from experience, if I do a little bit of this technique on it, that'll help unlock things. So I think it's generally accepted now that you want to have as many different strings to your bow as possible, as many different techniques as possible, and call on any one of them that's useful at the time. And sometimes you try one thing and it doesn't work, and you go to the next one, try it, doesn't work. Sometimes you just do a little bit of everything. But yeah, I think a little bit of everything is my answer.
Okay, right. Just on kind of getting into character, I wanted to talk about your portrayal of Sammy in Home. Yeah. What was it like getting to play him? Because I imagine it's quite difficult to find a middle ground between, the serious issues of a Syrian refugee, but it's also comedic. Was that challenging at all?
I mean, everybody brings that up. And the truth is, no, it wasn't challenging at all, because all the difficult work was done in the writing. Rufus had the difficult job. He's the one that had to navigate that tightrope. All I had to do was come on set and say his words, and it would be done. The work was already done. Yeah. What I had to do was what I wanted to do was play that part with dignity. And bring some dignity back into the conversation, to make a character lovable and warm, and enjoy them navigating the scenarios that were put forward in the script. I did a lot of research again for that, a lot of factual research, and a lot of asking refugees about their experience. And as we can see from recent history, you know, the temptation to play a refugee in a stereotypical way is so strong. But the truth is, and what the show was trying to say, is that you see a refugee and you think of a sort of poor person fleeing, you know, somebody who has nothing, when in fact many of them are more affluent and wealthier than you and I. You know, they're doctors and scientists and engineers and all sorts, CEOs, everything. It's just their country gets carpet bombed, and everyone around them dies, and every building that they ever lived in is reduced to rubble. They've only got a backpack and they've got to flee, you know. And then they reach our border, the borders of a European country, and they're told that they're refugees. They have to drive taxis, you know. They have to stand in line. They have to wait years to find out if they're desirables or not. They get given £57 a week to pay rent and food, and you know, they're more human than people want to think. So that was the learning process. That's what I had to sort of overcome, was the temptation to play them as to play the stereotypical refugee idea.
Do you think home is quite an important thing for people to watch, maybe? Because I think especially what's happening with Ukraine at the moment, I think, and I mean for me, like I think home definitely enlightened me. I
think it is very, very important. I always thought home was important because of how it humanized refugees that had up to that point been demonized and been reduced to these one-dimensional, two-dimensional archetypal figures that were the source of that were basically a political ping pong between the right and the left of our political spectrum. And I felt that home was important in order to humanize them. But really, it was also, I never appreciated just how educational it was and how important it was to teach people about this notion of what a refugee actually is. Because they're the people that can afford to leave. They're the people that had money and they could leave. But there are others in the country that couldn't afford to leave. And then, you know, you can't imagine what their life is. And I think that speech that Rufus wrote, with that little showdown in series 1 between me and Rufus's character, Sammy, and Rufus's character, Peter. Where he tells him, we're the middle classes, you know, we have everything you have, you know, olive oil and, you know, flat screen TVs, all the rest of it. Like we had everything. And we're just like you. And that's what scares you the most about us, because we are just like you. I think that was, looking back on it and in light of what's happening in Ukraine, that's an incredibly important speech. And I think it's telling that there is a viral video right now of a Ukrainian journalist basically saying the same speech that Rufus wrote, almost exactly the same. That, you know, she says, I went and had coffee in my little hipster coffee shop downtown, in a lovely part downtown. I loved my little apartment, you know, in a really affluent suburb. I'm a journalist. I had deadlines. I go to work in a really hip part of town and blah, blah, blah. And now I'm a refugee in a camp. And I feel like my whole life is upside down. And it's the same story. It's the same thing he says, Sammy tells Peter, you know, same exact speech, the same thing, you know. And Rufus, I think, was very prescient in writing that. It just goes to show you how brilliant he is as a thinker and a writer as well.
You're Moroccan, is that right?
I'm half Moroccan,
so I was wondering, obviously Rufus, who wrote it, he's a white man, so it's unlikely that he'll have had like any experiences of like discrimination or racism. Were there ever any times when you or maybe someone else on the cast maybe intervened or tweaked scenes that tackled discrimination or racism?
Discrimination and racism are big words. The answer is no. not discrimination or racism.
Right.
The problem is a lot more subtle,
Yeah.
complicated and complex, because when you're talking about bias, there's often unconscious. The best thing you can do, which is what Rufus did and what Adam Tandy did, what the entire production did, was to be aware that they're not on the receiving end of a lot of things that I might be, or Hassan or anybody else. Hassan, our advisor. And therefore, if we speak up to say something, that it's something that will be listened to. And that's what I found.
Okay.
There was a scene there's that prayer scene, that fake prayer scene in the beginning of sort of top of episode 2 of season 1. That was written completely differently from a sort of a fake Muslim prayer angle. And I said, you can't do that because it's insulting, it's this and that, and people, I think that's the point, is that people don't mean to insult or make fun of or write something negative about someone. People just do what they think works. And as long as you remain open to the fact that somebody can go, no, you think that works, but it actually doesn't, for these reasons that you would have no idea about. And that's what I was at liberty to say. Just the perfect combination is what you want on a set. You just want everybody collaborating and talking in that way. There was definitely lots of stuff, lots of different iterations of the script, scenes that could have gone certain ways, and stepping in to say, maybe let me not say that. Also, I was very conscious of wanting, I really didn't want Sammy to be thought of in a negative light at all. And so there was a lot of little tweaks that I asked, could I say it this way instead of that way? Because this is a bit too mean and that is a bit kinder. Right. And that was me wanting to represent Arabs and an Arab refugee, and I wanted them to be held in a good light, Any close up on my fingers, I asked for Vaseline to be put on my fingers, because I've got relatively dry, crusty nails. I always had the nails cleaned and everything moisturized, because I didn't want the close up fingers to be all crusty and dirty like mine. I didn't want to perpetuate any negative, perpetuate the negative stereotype. So it was that was the kind of spot, flashlight that I was shining on everything.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about House of Gucci. What was it like getting to act alongside some of the greats like Al Pacino? Was that quite intimidating?
No, I've worked with some big names before, and I think what would have been intimidating if I hadn't done my own prep, my own work.
Right.
I was sort of ready for anything. I mean, it's lovely to meet these people. It's lovely to say you've met them. It's lovely to have a picture with them. But ultimately, what they want is to just be seen as your colleague. And for me, for anybody who works with them, to bear in mind that they have hundreds of people pulling at their attention every day. So if you can just be one less person wanting anything from them, then they're happy. I'll tell you what I told Al Pacino when I first met him. I said, I sort of shook his hand and I said, I just want to say the honor is deep and the privilege is great. And from now on until for the rest of my days, you'll be able to tell everyone that you worked with the great Youssef Kerkour. And he went, ha ha ha. And that was great. But and Ridley was the one I was most nervous about meeting. I was such a I got the BAFTA Breakthrough Award shortly before, a few months before, and they had asked me, who would you like to be your mentor? And I said, look, I know it's silly, but I'd like Ridley Scott. And 5 months later, I'm on set with him. Not that they arranged it; they didn't arrange it, but it just happened that way. I was really keen to learn as much as I can from him, and I'm still learning from him. So it's wonderful. And when you meet these iconic names, it's exactly what you think it's going to be. They have a way of living up to your image of them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Unlike sort of other actors that you might sort of have seen that you really want to meet and all that stuff. But when they're icons, the big ones, Madonna, De Niro, Quentin Tarantino, like all of these massive iconic names. When you meet them, they are exactly what you think they're going to be. They live up to their status, which is great. Adam Driver was the one that impressed me the most.
Right.
He was so professional. He was so good. He had so much control over what he was doing, and he was so polite and kind and generous, and it was just lovely, absolutely lovely.
Yeah. Oh, that's great to hear. You also, so there's the scene where Al Pacino's character is selling his shares to you, and Jared Leto's in that scene as well. I've heard him and like obviously loads of other actors have done quite a lot of like method acting. I was wondering if you've tried method acting, or would you ever try it?
I have tried method acting. I certainly trained it. The short answer is it's not my cup of tea. Right. And I don't do it the way most people do it. But there are at the heart of method acting is something called sense memory, which is actually very useful. Right. Because if you need to start crying on command, you need to be able to recall an emotion. Actually, no, that's emotional recall. What you want is sense recall. So just do a very quick lesson. Emotional recall is where you remember a sad moment and you relive the sad moment, and it makes you sad. You can't keep that up if you're doing a play. You can't do it for 8 shows a week. You can't. Eventually that memory stops being as powerful as it was. Okay. And then what you end up being forced to do is recall anything that makes you sad. Just thinking about the most horrible things and just getting into this place. Now that's bad for you. That's very, very bad for your psyche. That's what messes people up. Sense memory is trying to recall how your shoulders felt when you heard some bad news, how your fingers were cold, what did your body feel like, what was it like to sort of wear those clothes and so on and so forth. And so people stay in character to sort of maximize the amount of time they are in somebody else's shoes so that their senses get used to it. Yeah. And then when they're on set, they're just recalling the sense memory so easily because they're basically living it. Right. Now, I don't think you need to do that. I don't think you need to be in character 24/7 in order to have good sense memory recall. You just need to do your homework and be very, very strong about certain things, get very strong images or whatever. There's so many different ways. But my answer is I've always found it very challenging when someone, Jared, not so much, because that was quite gentle, actually. They just said, look, we call him Paolo, we don't call him Jared. So I never met Jared, I met Paolo. Oh, and wow. He was very kind, very nice, polite, did a scene, left. He wasn't doing a lot of the things you hear about other method actors doing, which can be very off-putting. And I think if anybody's technique invades another person's technique, that's not acting. You can call it method acting, but if you're screaming and shouting before a take or making yourself throw up or all these things you hear about, that affects everyone around you. That throws other people around you off. And that's not acting. I'm sorry. I'm happy to go on the record saying that. It's not. Your acting shouldn't interfere with other people's process. Your process shouldn't interfere with other people's process, which is what I was so very grateful to see Jared doing, because he didn't really get in the way of other people's job. Yeah. Also, you never really see a movie with 10 people all doing it. Right. It's always one of the actors is doing method acting, and they're supported by everyone around them doing proper acting. If you don't mind me saying,
That's fair enough. Has that ever happened to you where you've worked with a method actor who was a bit too invasive in their way of doing it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think because I tend to be bigger than most people, they sort of naturally don't get into sort of conflict or anything like that. But right. I've had my costume ripped by somebody that's going a bit too hard. You know, I've had scratches on there. I've had my neck cranked too far in a fake fight, and I still to this day have soreness in the sort of top part of my spine because of that. You know, it's people just lack of control.
Yeah,
I've certainly seen things happen to other people. You know, when you can't say good morning to someone because they're in character, you know, it's just that's tough. That's hard. It's like, well, what are we doing here? You know, what if something changes? What if the script changes? You know, then what? What if I change my performance? You know, you think you want to go with the flow, but actually you don't. You're in your own freaking zone. So it's definitely happened in the past. But you know, it's also part of our business. That's what everybody's, like I began by saying, everybody's got a different technique that works for them. There are many actors that just want to do this method thing. They just want to be in character all the time. They want to live it, breathe it. They want to live and breathe the character. Whereas I think as long as you do your research, your brain has all that information. And then the job is about getting out of your own way and not putting up any obstacles, and just letting that trusting that information is going to bleed out and be in the movie. You know, like to prepare for Kirador in House of Gucci, I memorized 15 years worth. I got my hands on the financials of the company that he founded, Investcorp, which you can buy online, and I bought them.
Oh.
I found the year that they first meet me, which was 1992, I think. And I went back 15 years and I memorized all their profit and loss, and margins and all that. So it took me 3 months. And I just had 3 months I just had 15 years worth of numbers in my head. And that's all I did, really. Because I knew that was the heartbeat of the character. Yeah. And I could just be on set, sit back, listen to everybody doing their thing. And I was confident. You know, knew my stuff, but because I knew exactly how much money my company had earned, how much we were spending, acquisitions, all that stuff, you know, in the billions.
So speaking of Kadar, was it fun getting to play someone that like rich? Because I know, like you said, you felt confident.
What a great question. Do you know what the answer? Absolutely. First time I'd experienced it. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I mean, I've played lords and things like that on stage, but it's not the same thing. This time, it absolutely was wonderful to play somebody that wealthy.
That's good.
Because, first of all, the set, you know, the costumes, you know, my suits were just fantastic. They were tailor-made for me. You know, my hotel room was in a genuinely really fancy hotel. Oh, no. I sat down on a chair, plush little thing, you know, Ridley just went, so a cigar, what do you want? You know, Monte Cristo, Cohiba, and he listed off these amazing cigars. I just thought, I love that, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Everything was sort of luxury all around us. And it was wonderful, man. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was a real trip. It was the first time I'd experienced that. And I just thought, well, it'd be nice to do this. Can you imagine doing it for like a year? You know, it's very comfortable day's work, you know.
And were you familiar with the Gucci story, like before researching the role? No,
I don't think many people were, which is what was so insightful about the decision to sort of make this story. It's really, you know, Janina, Ridley's wife, had been wanting to make this for about 20 years, and she was the exec producer on it.
Oh, right.
She had spotted this story and said, this would make an amazing movie. But I didn't know anything about it. I knew about the Versace tragedy. I knew about Armani tragedy. But the Gucci tragedy, you know, these Italian fashion names all getting killed off, you know, it's crazy.
So I've heard some actors get to like keep props from films and things. Did you get to did you get any like free Gucci clothes or any of those nice suits to keep?
So the year before we shot Gucci, I was actually in Rome again on a different series. And while I was on that series, I got nominated for a BAFTA. Right. And I didn't have a suit. I mean, I had suits, but I didn't have a black tie, tuxedo type suit.
Yeah.
So I did a bit of research and I found that there's this tailors called Sartoria Carbone. Fantastic, old school Italian tailors, hand-stitched, handmade everything, and very, very well respected and not too expensive. And it turns out all the bankers from Canary Wharf and all that, they all go there. You know, I didn't know. But anyway, so I found these guys and I explained this. They only speak Italian, and I was just sort of muddled on through with my Italian. I just said, look, I've got a ceremony to go to. Can I get the suit? And we struck up a good friendship because his name's Giuseppe. Youssef in Italian is Giuseppe. It's Joseph Giuseppe. Yeah. So he calls me the big Giuseppe. I call him the little Giuseppe. And we struck up a nice friendship. He took my measurements. I paid for the suit, picked the material out, and he just said, I'm going to do something really nice for you. And then about 2 weeks after that, the pandemic shut down the production, and it was all the start of all the craziness, and we had to leave. Went back to England, and then the production was officially, the contract was officially done. I was not going to go back to Italy. Right. Called him up and I said, I'm so sorry, but it's done. He said, no problem, I'll just finish it and then I'll send it to you. And he sent it to me. He sent me the suit all the way from Italy in a massive box. And so I kept contact with him. And then I got a call from the costume designer, Janty Yates on Gucci, asking me for my measurements for the costumes. And they were going to, she said, could you give it to me soon? Because I'm off to Rome we're going to set up the office in Rome and stuff. Yeah. I said, well, look, I've just come from Rome, where I've been to I just had a suit made for the BAFTAs, which in the end I wore in my living room, by the way, because we did it on Zoom. And I said, he's got my measurements, and I had my most recent measurements. And so they contacted him and they hired him to make me 3 suits, 3 amazing 3-piece suits.
Yeah.
They could only fit me. My friend made them, and it was all good. When it was done, and we all came back to England, and the whole Oscar buzz was going on, I texted Janty and I just said, listen, any chance I could buy the suits? And she contacted production and they sent them to me. So I've got, that's a long way of answering your question by saying, not only have I kept my suits, but I've kept suits made by my tailor, who basically made me 3 suits, and the production covered the cost. Great. Everybody always asks me about the shoes, and I recently, because I'm working on with Ridley again on Napoleon, and I saw Janty, and I said, everybody asks me about the shoes. And she said, did they not send you the shoes? And I went, no. And she went, what? Oh, well, then we must get them to send them to you. So I might get the shoes as well. Yeah. But you see, I'm very proud of myself over the last 22 years. I've never done what many actors do, the majority of actors do, which is just nick stuff. Right. End of the last day, you take your costume off, you know you're not going to come back, and you just pop something in your bag and then you go home with it. To be honest, the productions don't care. I mean, they do care sometimes if they want to hold on to things.
Right.
But I've never done that. I've never done it without telling the production. I've always asked if I could buy anything I liked. Sometimes they sell them to me. They'll sell them to me at a discount. Or I wait and then I ask if for example, the series is not continuing, I ask if I can keep blah, blah, blah. So Sammy's sweater, for example, I've got. Oh, right. And I got that about 1.5 years after we sort of were officially done.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, that's very special. Yeah, it's a very, very special thing.
What work of yours are you most proud of?
I am most proud of Sammy.
Right.
I'm most proud of being a part of that show.
Yeah.
It was one of those shows that transcended my job. It was more, it wasn't just an acting gig. It was like, it was important to do. Anything with a higher purpose always makes me feel better. The different charity gigs I've done, I've always done my best acting on those. You know, I think about what's the best acting I've ever done. It's always those gigs. You know, it's always these amazing things that have a purpose greater than my own career, my own thing.